Good morning. Thank you for joining us. You are watching KUHS, the stream on Melody Drive. I am Paul Lane, the host of the Weekend Boost. And we thank you all for taking time out of your day to watch us. Those of you who saw my post earlier this week, you got to see this interview today. I mean, I'll tell you this. Every once in a while, you get an author who really is making an impact on the literary world, and I'm just so honored to have Manuel Ramos. He wrote this book, The Angels in the Wind, and actually this is his 10th or 11th book, and so we're going to be talking about all of his books. I, of course, am the author of The Caregiver's Handbook, a self-help love story, and we're going to be talking to Manuel this morning about just his writing and just a little bit about what he's been up to, and I got to tell you, I heard his name on NPR a couple of weeks ago. And man, they just really had rave reviews on him, and so I immediately got a hold of him, and I was so fortunate that he returned my call, and here we are today, and so Mr. Ramos, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I do appreciate the invitation, man. You know, it's a real honor actually to be present on your show, and I appreciate it. I hope we can have a good conversation this morning.
Oh, absolutely. So we started off, and you told me you had some good news. So let's get started with that.
Okay, sure. Actually, I got a couple of pieces of good news concerning my writing. One is that a short story of mine that appeared in Anthology a few years ago has been purchased by Disney Plus United Kingdom.
Wow.
And so what they're doing is that whole anthology is going to become a series, and we expect the filming to start here, and then maybe another year, I guess, the series will be available.
Okay.
So that's one piece of good news, you know, that I'll actually get to see my characters come to life and watch the plot unfold.
Turn it down. Sorry about that.
The bottom. We're live.
Yes, that's live broadcasting for you. Sorry about that.
No problem, man.
So Disney, UK.
UK, right? So they're going to be. Yeah, it's a great anthology. It was called Culprits, and the idea that the editors pitched to us, to the writers, was that there's a heist. You know, a gang gets together and rips off this rich Texan. Then they all separate, go their separate ways. And each of the authors were supposed to write a story about a character in the gang, about what happens after the heist.
Wow.
So, you know, we kind of follow everybody around to see what happens. So the producers liked that idea, although they took it out of Texas, and they're going to film in England. And, you know, they're going to change the story, and they got their own ideas of what to do. But basically, Culprits will be the series.
Oh, nice.
So we were all excited about that.
Wow.
And then the other piece of news is there was just a press release yesterday issued by the Colorado Authors Hall of Fame, which is an institution that's been around for, I think, 3 years now. So it's fairly new. But they just they let everybody know that I'm one of the authors they're going to put in that Hall of Fame.
Man.
So that was cool, you know. It's nice to be recognized. And so I'll be in the second class of the Authors Hall of Fame. They're going to have a big gala and a dance and a banquet and all that, you know, in September.
I see. Wow, good for you.
Yeah,
congratulations.
That was great, yeah.
Wow, that is just so cool. How long have you been writing?
Well, Paul, I've been writing since I was a kid, actually. You know, I grew up in the small town of Florence, Colorado, down there by Canyon City. And, you know, it was really a small town. I mean, all the time I was there, it was like 3,000 people.
Wow.
This is before the prisons and all of that kind of became the industry down there. But I started to write when I was in Florence. I wrote little character sketches. I spent a lot of my time in the small public library there in Florence. And I read everything, you know, everything I could get my hands on. And they let me, eventually they got to know who I was, and they just let me read whatever, you know, probably stuff I shouldn't have been reading. But, you know, I picked up the habit of reading, and that was reinforced by my parents and my grandparents. You know, they were always encouraging me to read and learn new stuff. And so eventually I thought, man, you know, I'd like to do this, what the writer in this book has done for me. You know, took me out of Florence, gave me adventures I never thought I'd have, met people I never thought I would meet. I said, I'd like to do that, you know, and I think I can do that. So at a pretty young age, I started writing. I kept at it through high school. I had an English teacher that really validated me as a writer. Made me believe that I could actually do something with my writing. I'm always grateful to her for the support. Her name was Treva French. And that was at a high school in Colorado Springs. Our family had moved to Springs by then. And after that, I went to CSU in Fort Collins, kept writing. And I wasn't doing anything with it, you know, I was just writing for myself, for enjoyment. Took as many creative writing and literature courses that I could. Then I went to law school. You know, this was 1970 when I went to law school in Boulder. There was still a time of political unrest and the Chicano movement and all these things were happening. So a lot of us decided that we could do something worthwhile in our communities if we became lawyers. So I went to Boulder. We were quite active. You know, the Chicano law students were quite an active group there, along with the other student groups. But I quit writing creatively. You know, it became writing for the law school, and kind of my mind became trained to think like a lawyer.
Much different mindset.
Much different, you know.
Oh yeah, the writing is more technical and more.
Yeah. Yeah, and more
jargon, legal jargon.
Yeah, and different objectives, you know. But I got to say that learning how to think like a lawyer and write like a lawyer taught me discipline, which, you know, is essential, I think, for a writer. You have to be committed to doing the work, and you need to establish some kind of self-discipline so that it'll get done. You know, I hear people talking about they need inspiration to write, or you know, something like that. And if you wait for inspiration, it never shows up.
No book's ever going to materialize.
You know, you gotta go out there and just do it. You know, and so I'm grateful to law school for instilling that sense of discipline and into my writing. And when I left law school, I became a lawyer and practiced in Longmont and then Denver with Legal Services, the Colorado Legal Aid Program. And it was about a dozen years later, after law school, that I returned to creative writing.
Oh wow! So you took a little break between.
Yeah, it was a serious break, you know. I mean, but eventually I got kind of burned out on the legal stuff that was going on, and I knew I needed to do something else with myself. So I went back to trying to write creative fiction. And of all things, I wrote about a burned out Chicano lawyer, you know, and that was one of my first short stories. Eventually, that character turned into Luis Montes, who was the protagonist in my first novel, The Ballad of Rocky Ruiz. That was published in 1993. And, you know, I thought it was great, man. I mean, we got a book published. It won the Latino Literary Award out of the University of California at Irvine.
Oh, man.
It won the Colorado Book Award here in Colorado for fiction. And it was nominated for an Edgar Award, which comes out of the Mystery Writers of America. And the Edgar is kind of like an Oscar for mystery writers.
Man.
So, you know, I thought, oh shit, I should have done this a long time ago, you know. I mean, it was great. Of course, nothing like that ever happened again, but that first book came out, and then, you know, after that I was on my way.
You were a machine after that. I mean,
well.
So did you set like a goal for how many words you'd write a day or how many pages? Because I know when I wrote my book, it was like, sit down, you're going to write. You know, for me, it was, you know, I would write I would designate from 2 o'clock till 5 o'clock. I'm going to write, you know, and I'm not leaving the computer. I know I talk to a lot of authors, and they'll tell me different, different techniques that they use to discipline themselves.
Right. Yeah, I think whatever works for you is the way to do it. I really think is the best advice for a writer is, I mean, you do have to be disciplined, you have to be committed, you got to be willing to do the work. But I know some people write outlines with all the details of a book before they start writing. I don't do it that way. Other people set a goal of how many words or pages per day, which I think is a good idea. Myself, the way I usually do it is, once I've got the idea and once my characters are set in my head, then I'll start writing, and I'll get to a point where I feel that I'm doing pretty good, and instead of going to the point where I'm tired and burned out, I stop, where I'm still feeling good about the writing, then I could actually keep going, but I stop so that I can kind of pick it up the next time I get back to the computer, or the notepad or whatever I'm using. And usually when I start again, I go back over what I wrote the day before, and kind of edit that, and then proceed forward another page or two, or wherever I feel comfortable, and then come back the next day and look at it again. And so I'm kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, you kind of like that.
Oh yeah, I think it's really a redundant thing, and you have to just continually, like you say, I would, when I was writing, I'd have to go back, and I mean, I've only written 1 book, so I'm not that authority, but I would go back and I'd look at everything I'd written the day before, and I would talk to someone about it or show someone, and I'd say, tell me how you feel about this. I really, for me, I needed a lot of feedback, and and so it was. I never dreamed I'd write a book. I was writing blogs, and someone said, "Hey, you should turn this into a book."
Sure.
But I mean, when you're writing a fiction novel, I mean, my girl Dee and me are reading *Angels in the Wind*, your most recent one, A Mile High Noir, and oh my gosh, and we're reading it, and you start reading it, and you start getting deeper and deeper into this mystery, and I'm about 10 pages from the end, and I don't want to give too much away, but I almost felt, I thought to myself, I wonder if he wrote this and then had the answer to the mystery as he wrote it, or did he have it before he wrote the book? Because I mean, I can't put it down. I'm serious. It's a great read.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that, Paul. That's great. I really appreciate it. I'll tell you, a lot of the time when I start a book, I do not know how it's going to end. The term you hear a lot of these days is organic. And my writing is organic, I believe. I start something, I have a character in mind, I have some kind of major conflict in mind, and I start writing, and sort of grows on its own and develops, and I just go with it. Some new characters get introduced, new conflicts, and I just go with it, and eventually I start seeing what's going to happen at the end of the book, and I realize where I got to go. So then that means I got to go back and make sure everything fits. The way I'm
harmonized.
The way I see it ending really is going to make sense to the reader, because as I say, I'm writing and it's just sort of developing as it's going along. So then I got to step back and say, well, that may have been okay in my head, but does it really make sense to somebody else who's just reading it? And so you go back and edit and re-edit. That's mostly what writing is to me, is editing,
Yes, it is.
Correcting and fixing stuff up. So I've had books where I've been totally surprised by the end. I've had others where I knew how it was going to end almost immediately. I was working towards that goal. So it's been different experience for me that way.
Yeah, I loved it. I really do. It's so exciting because every page you turn, you just want to see what. There's a character in this book, just for the audience. There's a character. His name's Gus Corral, and he's from Denver. He's from North Denver too, which is I thought was really cool because I'm from North Denver. And he goes to southern Colorado to this town called Melton, and he's looking for his cousin George Montoya's son, Matthias Montoya, and he goes through all this thing. But on a side note, he had just received a head injury.
Right.
Well, earlier, in his career, not far before. And so all through this story, you know, he's dealing with this head injury, and he's dealing with, you know, trying to find this young man, and the secrecy in the small town. And I mean, there's just so many elements that make it just gripping, you know. I mean, the way you put your words together, I just was that just a gift you had, or did you just develop that over the years, or?
Well, I've always loved to write. You know, as I talked about before, you know, as a kid growing up, I would spend a lot of time in the library, and when I decided that I wanted to try to do that too, I just sort of got into it, you know, and then that English teacher in high school really reinforced the idea that I was okay doing this stuff. So yeah, Gus is a character that came out of a short story. Sounds like I'm losing my voice here. The short story was called The Skull of Pancho Villa. And Gus, at that, you know, he's a guy who was born in the north side of the streets, and he has to look for the skull of Pancho Villa, of all things. It's a long story, so I won't get all into the details, but he has to go out, and because of his sister had the skull of Pancho Villa, the Mexican revolutionary. And it's a true story that his grave was robbed and his skull was stolen, and to this day nobody knows where it is.
Oh, gee.
That's true. All right. So I took that germ of an idea, and I made up this story that somehow it ended up with Gus's family, and they had kept it in closets and boxes and stuff, you know, and just sort of passed it down over the years. It ended up with Gus's sister, and one day it gets Corinne, right? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And one day it's stolen. So she calls on Gus to go find it. So he's got to go into the streets of the north side to figure out who took this skull. So that's kind of how he gets started being an investigator, you know, he's helping out his sister. So that was a short story I wrote, and it eventually became a chapter in a book called Desperado. That's this book here. And then I kept up with it, kept up with Gus. And by now, in the latest one, Angels in the Wind, he's become a professional private eye.
Oh, okay.
You know, he's licensed and he's getting paid for it. So he goes to help out his cousins in Melton for the missing boy, look for the missing boy. But you're right. In the previous book, The Golden Havana Night, he did suffer a serious head injury. And at the end of that book, we weren't sure what happened to Gus. You know, we just knew he'd been really hurt.
The baseball bat, yeah.
Right, with the baseball bat. And so at the beginning of the latest one, we find out, well, he's okay, but he's still got all these after effects of the beating he took.
Yeah.
And you're right, he's got to deal with that.
Yeah, I thought it really added to the story, you know, because I mean, this guy has so much on his hands, and he's battling with these really resistant people in this small town who don't want to give him details, and you know, he keeps coming across clue after clue after clue, and it's just like, oh, come on, I can't wait to turn the page, you know. I love this kind of read because it's you know, it's very entertaining, but it's also very, you know, it's enlightening, and it's just so cool to see how you've constructed it in a way that it really does make you want to just pick it up and, you know, just not put the book down. And last night at 11:30, I'm reading the book because I really wanted to get it done by this morning, and I'm just like, oh man, I don't want to go to bed, you know. So, I you know, when we first met and I talked to you about my hero, Victor Villaseñor, I came upon his book back in about 1988, The Reign of Gold. And he came to the Tavern Cover bookstore, and I got the chance to meet him, and he inspired me so greatly. And having read your book, I'm really there. I'm at that level. I think that you are that author. I mean, you are the author that writes this kind of a book, and I long to develop that kind of an ability, because you know, writing a story, and you know, I was just reading this morning about this rain had fallen and the steam's all over, and you know, you could see you could feel the moisture in the air, and you know, he just you could just almost see the sweat dripping down his head, you know. And there was one scene where he was in I can't remember where he was, but he feels the sweat dripping down his back, and it's like, oh yeah, I could just feel that. I could just really sense that the tension when Matthias Montoya, when they find out where he was found. And again, I don't want to go too much, but guys, I got to tell you, you have got to read this story, and I'll definitely be reading more of your books here in the weeks and months to come.
Oh, that's great news to me. I've been doing this. The first book came out in '93.
Okay.
And I've published 11 novels now, and 1 collection of short stories. I've even done some poetry, some nonfiction stuff. When I was a lawyer, I wrote a handbook on landlord-tenant law that became a book that judges and attorneys and landlords and tenants use around the state. And that's still being printed and written, although there's other lawyers now that are updating it now that I'm retired. But, so, I've spent a good chunk of my life being a writer, and it's very nice to hear somebody say they like what I did.
Oh yeah. Your characters, do these characters come from people that you know or people that you've met in your life? I mean, they're so real. I mean, they're just like real people that you know.
Well, yeah, Paul. I'm always, or I used to be when I was thinking more about what I was going to write next. I'm always taking mental notes of people and conversations and dialogue, things that I hear and see. Research for a fiction writer can often be just paying attention to what's going on around you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily have to look stuff up in the library to do research, although that's necessary sometimes. But just watching people and seeing how they interact and making note of characteristics and personalities, you may not use it right away, but if you notice it and take an accounting of it, eventually it's going to help you when you're creating something. It's going to appear on the page, I believe.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, a lot of the characters in my stories, had their origins somewhere in the past with somebody I may have met or knew, and then it's just up to me to expand on that and build it up and see where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
So I've occasionally used actual things that have happened, especially when I was writing about a lawyer. And the first 5 of my books were about a Chicano lawyer in Denver, Luis Montes, and so I had a lot of material from my own experience that I could rely on as a basis. I never really wrote a story based completely on one of my cases, but bits and pieces of it. Yeah. Sure.
Wow, that is awesome. That is so cool. All right, folks, if you're just joining us, you're watching KUHS The Stream on Melody Drive. This is the Weekend Boost, and I am the host, Paul Lane, and we're talking to author Manuel Ramos. His most recent novel, this is his 11th novel, Angels in the Wind. I'm almost finished with this novel, and oh my gosh, folks, you can find this book at the tattered cover. Where else can they find your book or books?
Well, any bookstore can order it if they don't have it on their shelves. But like you said, the tattered cover does have the actual book on its shelves. Online, you can order it just about anywhere, the typical places. Amazon and all those kinds of places carry the books. And directly from the publisher, the publisher of my books, and actually they've published all of the Gus Carell novels, is Arte Publico Press, which comes out of the University of Houston. And Arte Publico Press is actually the largest press in the world of Latino-themed literature.
Wow.
So it's a very respected, independent, small press. I mean, it is a small press. It's got a small staff that work their butts off and to get the books out. And they do a great job in terms of editing and communicating with me as the author on what we're trying to do with the book. They even give me a say in the cover art of the books,
Too cool.
which is, you know, I've been published by big New York City publishers. My first books came out of St. Martin's Press in New York City. But I gotta say, you know, I never got the attention from that publisher like I do with Arte Publico Press. In fact, the books would come out of St. Martin's Press with a cover that I never had seen before, and it was just sort of sprung on me. And I mean, most of them were okay, but you know, I might have been able to give them different ideas. But with Arte Publico Press, they're very open to suggestions, and in fact, the cover for Angels in the Wind is an idea that I had. You know, it's the pickup that Gus drives.
I can see Gus driving that truck.
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
It's a 1960 Chevy Apache. So we talked with the graphics people at Arte Publico about what the cover could look like. And I even went so far as to make a model car of the little truck I got at the house.
Oh, too cool, man. Yeah, I was curious about that. You know, I've talked to authors who say, yeah, you know, when I went to my publisher and they didn't give me any literary freedom. They made me really change the format of the book, and the end changed. And, you know, and I've talked to authors who tell me, you know, it was really frustrating dealing with that. And, you know, and I'm curious if that was something that you had to deal with, or were you able to have a lot of freedom, creative freedom?
Well, I like I said, I've been published by New York City major press, small press, independent press, small university presses, and they each have their own style of how they relate to their writers. I've been pleased the majority of the time with whatever suggestions an editor makes to me about changes that might be needed or maybe some corrections. Because the way I look at it, they're just trying to make the book better. But I've never been challenged where a major idea that I've had is the editors have told me, no, you can't do that. You know, and I probably wouldn't go along with that.
Sure.
But other things, you know, it's fine with me if an editor, a copy editor, or just an editor looks at the book and makes suggestions to move things around, or you know, change a word here or there. But again, with a big press, you get kind of lost in the crowd with your, you know, communicating with your editor. With the small press, although they don't have as much money for marketing, for example, as a big press, so more of that responsibility lands on the shoulders of the writer. So that's the downside of a small press, of course. But I mean, I know the names of everybody at Arte Publico. I've met them all. I've been down to Houston a few times. We've done other things together. So yeah, I'm very happy with my relationship with my publisher.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's nice to hear that there's publishers who work with Latinos, and you know, because I don't want to get too off into politics or anything, but you know, ever since I was a young man, I heard this affirmative action, and I heard you know, that the only reason that Latinos and blacks could get promoted was because they were tokens, and you know, I was so frustrated as a young man hearing that, because I always said, you know what, let me go by the content of my character. You know, look at the quality of my work, look at the detail, and look at what I do. Let me stand on my. I don't need a favor. Just hire me like you do the next person, you know. And so I really feel, you know, happy to hear that you found a publisher that really hears you and understands that, you know, the Latino culture in many ways is very unique in its own self, you know. Our communication, our language, I mean, it's I don't know if our language, but you know, a lot of our culture is very unique unto itself.
Well, sure, and you know, I do my part, as small as it is, to portray the community I come from, my heritage, as honestly and as realistically as I can. You know, I mean, it's fiction, so people have to understand that I'm just telling stories. You know, I'm not really a spokesman for anybody or anything like that. But when I deal with my characters, I do want them to be three-dimensional and honest. So I will put stuff in the book, you know, related to my culture and my history, and I don't have any problem with that. You know, I mean, if people don't like it, they don't have to read the book. But you know, this is part of being a human being in the 21st century. You know, people have to be aware of other cultures, other heritages, other histories, no matter what. You know, not just Latinos, but you know, all kinds of groups. So, and what you're talking about in terms of you know, the Arte Publico having a respect for the Latino voice and all that. You know, the reality there is that it took Latinos to create that. You know, at the University of Houston. You know, I mean, we Nick Canelos, who's the director, and other people had to seize the opportunity down there and then do something with it. You know, so nobody gave that to us. You know, we created it, we built it, and now they're doing a great job. You know, I mean, they publish a good number of novels and short stories and children's books every year, and they're still out there presenting our art and our culture to the masses. And so to the non-Latino listeners of your program, you know, I would just invite you to pick up any book by an author that maybe you're not familiar with, and maybe you thought of it in terms of being ethnic literature or literature outside of the scope of what you may read, but just give it a shot, and I think you're going to see that we've all got things in common.
Absolutely.
And a lot of good fiction has universal application. So anybody should be able to pick up a good work of fiction and say, I recognize that, no matter what culture is being presented or not. I mean, it's just, it's happened to me. You know, I picked up books from authors that I never thought I would read, from a different country, or that was originally published in a different language, something like that. And you know, you get blown away, man. You recognize yourself, and then you see the uniqueness of other people. It's part of being a human being. Very cool.
Very cool. Yes. And you know, I think that's something that we've kind of lost sight of in these past 8 years and 4 years. And you know, we are one. You know, we're one country. We're one people. And I don't care if you're, you know, from the United States, or you're from Europe, or from Africa. We're one. You know, the blood courses through our veins, and it's red. You know. And so, you know, it's nice that you point that out. Your books are not just about Latinos. You write books about white. You know, you've written books about a lot of different cultures too. So that's kind of interesting. Not interesting, but I think it's really important, because it's a broad spectrum, and you're covering a lot of different topics. And
yeah. Well, what kind of world do we live in, right? I mean, there are some people, I guess, that are very isolated and have contact with very few people and aren't aware of the big picture. But for the rest of us, yeah, you know, I mean, go walk down the street and see who's represented and who's out there. And if it doesn't pique your interest, you know, that what's going on with these people? What are their history? It's a great thing about literature, you know.
Yes, you bet. You know, we had talked about, you know, this Angels in the Wind, and when they talk about Angels in the Wind, they're really referring to these kids that are runaways. And there's a shelter in Pueblo is that a real shelter? Was that fictional as well?
It's fiction, yeah.
Oh man, I tell you what, it was like, I want to go there and go volunteer. But you know, the Angels of the Wind are these youth that are fleeting. They come and they go, and they're this kid Matt, it was a really special kid. He, you know, they called him Einstein. It was like this, you know, just the little description that you hear of this kid that you actually never meet. It just really was gripping to me, and it made me feel a real connection, you know, because I'm really support youth and mentoring youth, and so, you know, that part of the book really was important to me. But you wrote this book during the pandemic.
For the most part, yeah.
And so you had some unique I don't know what challenges, but you had some unique writing situations where I'm sure you were isolated. You were really just stuck in a room or in your home for some time, and so it gave you some time to really do some faster or some really intense writing.
Yeah, yeah. Typically, it takes at least a year for me to write a book, and others have taken 2 years. You know, in fact, I published one book that took me 10 years to write.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I wasn't working on it solid for 10 years. I was writing other things, but from the time that I started it till the time I was finished, it was 10 years, you know. So, but typically it's about a year. Angels in the Wind, I had started, and I'd gotten, maybe, maybe 30 pages into it, 30, 40 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pandemic hit, and everything changed. And so I had to think about, what was going to happen when I finished the book. I mean, what if we were still in the pandemic? What was that going to mean, anything? But what I did find out was that, you're right, my wife and I were at the house a lot, like most people. We were staying home. We definitely weren't mingling with other folks to the degree that we used to. And if you recall, last summer was extremely hot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this summer has been hot too, but last summer it was. I mean, I guess that's just become the standard now. But it was very hot, and then all those wildfires were going on. We had some serious wildfires last summer, and it just. I mean, everybody was talking about how terrible 2020 was. Because so many bad things were happening around the world, and every day we'd wake up and there'd be something new, terrible that would happen. And if it wasn't wildfires, then it was a surge in the coronavirus, or some violence somewhere. Some demonstration for civil rights was disrupted. That all that was going on, and it was like everything was churning around. But I wasn't involved because I was at home.
On the inside looking out.
Yeah, it was kind of a weird situation, right? But what I found was, well, right, man, I sat down in my office at the house, or I'd go out to the front patio and under the shade of our tree, and it would be like 98 degrees, but I'd be there, scribbling away, writing, or working on my laptop. And then, put it in my manuscript. So I used that time, I think, to finish the book. And it got finished, last August. I presented it to Arte Público, and like I said, working with those folks was great. They got it out, in time for the spring book sales, which was usually, once you turn a book into a publisher, it's going to be at least a year later before it comes out. So they did a great job, and we got the cover I wanted. Now here it is.
Man, oh man, that's exciting. That's just so cool to see. There's something that I hope you don't mind. I just saw this and I said I got to read this. This author's note on the back of the book. It was just, I don't know. It stopped me in my tracks. That's the only way I could describe it. We didn't know it was the last summer before the casual use of the word pandemic, before wearing cloth masks became political symbol, before the long days of solitude and longer nights of isolation, the protests and tear gas and street battles were yet to come. The election that would change everything waited in the wings. Hearts were broken, souls lost, and the world too easily slipped into an unforeseen, unimaginary surreality, never-ending dream. The final stanza of an unwritten poem. We didn't know. Manuel, I read that when I first opened the book, man, and I said, this is going to be a good book. But just the words of, we didn't know, and there were so many things hitting us, bombarding us, like you say, protests and shootings and more protests and opposition, and I mean, it was scandal after scandal, and for you to be focused on this through all of that and just be able to shut all that out, that's what it takes, guys. If you had some advice for someone who's watching this show today and thinking, man, I got a book in me. I know there's a book in me. You know, what advice would you have to give them?
Well, there are a couple of pieces of advice that have been given to me that I pass on. One is, if you want to be a good writer, you've got to be a good reader.
Mm-hmm.
And so you read everything you can, you know, in as many different genres as you can. But if you think you're writing a story that maybe is a mystery, then for sure you've got to read a lot of mysteries. I believe, you just got to understand what's out there already, so that when you go to write something, not that you're going to copy or just follow the crowd, but you're going to know what the benchmarks are.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
parameters.
What's expected.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you know about the genre that you're writing in, I think the better writer you're going to be. It just makes more sense to me. So that's one piece of advice. Another one is that writing is not about talking; it's about writing. And so I meet people who will start talking about writing, and they'll describe a book that they have in their thoughts, or maybe that they've started, and they've got it worked out to the very end, but it's all in the head.
Mm-hmm.
And it hasn't yet been put on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a mechanical process of writing it and putting it down. You can think about it, and it's good to think about it, and it's good to have an idea in your head of what you're doing and where you're going and who the characters are. But then you got to actually do it, I mean, and it sounds simple and basic, but there are so many people I know can't get past that next step.
Page one.
And I understand it. I mean, nobody's forcing me to be a writer, okay? But it is hard work. And so there are times when I'm writing and I get frustrated and I get, I get a little sad because, it's not going quite the way I want it. Or maybe I have an idea in my head that sounds great, but when I go to put it down on paper, it doesn't quite come off as great, and so
absolutely,
you get beat up, you beat yourself up about that, So I've got to keep thinking of moving forward and progressing with the writing, and it is. I mean, it's a hard step to go from thinking and talking about it to actually doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if there are any good exercises for that, to get started.
Mm-hmm.
I think it helps if you don't try to bite off too much at the beginning. Like, don't think you're going to write the whole book in a month. Don't even think that you're going to write the first chapter in a month. Why don't you focus instead on, well, I want to get the first 5 pages done in maybe 2 weeks, and see if you can do that, and then proceed from there. And I think eventually, based on what other writers tell me, it becomes kind of part of your own process without you even thinking about it. You just go in and do it. You get to the point where you got to stop, and you stop, and then you start again the next day.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you were writing, and I know you have, and I think everyone I've ever talked to has gotten points where you have a writer's block. And oh man, that there's something you want to write about, but it just doesn't seem to come to mind. And does that happen to you?
Oh yeah, sure.
Because what do you do when you have that? Do you just stop writing and take a break, or do you just stay at it, or what do you do?
Yeah, I have stopped for a while and try to turn my attention to something else. I find exercise helps loosen up the brain. Go for I used to go for runs. Now I go for walks. Do a good workout, work up a sweat. Sometimes that helps to break free. Another thing that I've done in the past is I'll get to a point where I'm kind of stuck and I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. But in the back of my head, I had an idea about something that was going to happen later on in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll just go ahead and write that.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be out of sequence, and I'll have to somehow work it back so that it does fit. But I'll just write that anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and keep it going that way.
Man, that's great. That's interesting. I didn't even realize I was doing that when I was writing my book, because I'd be writing and then I'd say, oh man, I want to talk about this experience I had in the hospice center, you know, and so I'd make a little note and I'd put it on the side, you know, and so whenever I'm typing, if they get to the end, that note was always there. And so if I got writer's block, and that's what, for me, it really helped me was when I got writer's block and I had all these other thoughts I put down, I'm going to skip from this and I'd come down here. And so, you know, and like I say, I haven't written 11 novels, but, you know, the thing that helped me when those areas came was, you know, a lot of times I'd call someone up and say, you know, I'm writing this and I'm kind of wondering if you have any ideas, or, you know, like I say, I just write little special notes and, you know, that I tag onto the back end of the book. And I have to say that your book is so well edited. I usually when I'm reading a book, I can find a page error here and there. Your book is flawless. I mean, it's looks like you really got some real good editing. Did you edit yourself, or?
Well, yeah, I do a lot of editing myself. I mean, like I said before, that's really what I think writing is. You know, is rewriting and editing. Mm-hmm. The initial stuff that you put down, you know, that's the stuff we all love. You know, that's the passionate stuff. We get something down, and we're just amazed because we can see it on the page. Yeah. You know, and it expresses these emotions that we're feeling. But then writing is, well, fix that up so that other readers, when they get to it, they're not going to be overwhelmed by the flowery stuff. You know, they're going to be overwhelmed by your skill as a writer, your craftsmanship. You know, a writer doesn't want to be so obvious in the work that he or she interrupts the reader, you know. I mean, the writer's got to be invisible to the reader. You don't want to interfere with what's going on between the reader and your book. So you got to step back. So whenever I find myself inserting myself too much into the story, you know, I got to back up and take that kind of stuff out.
Dang, that's good. That's good stuff. Yeah, and I totally get it. You know, for me, when I wrote my book, it was really you know, an autobiography, I guess, you know, and so it was really hard to separate myself from the writing, you know. Yeah. But like when you're writing a fiction novel, I can see how easily you can slip your own character or your own personality inside to that, you know, that character that you're trying to portray, and so that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of a double-edged thing, because every artist, no matter what they do, if they're a writer or a painter or a musician, they're going to inject some of themselves into their art. That's just human nature, you know. It's inevitable, right? And so that's going to happen, you know. I mean, some of the ideas that my characters express are ideas that I have, you know. But what you've got to do is you've got to ease back on that, you know. You've got to step back so that it doesn't become the dominant thing in the writing, at least for fiction, you know. That's why you got to have different characters that are three-dimensional, you know, not just reflections of you as the writer.
Sure.
Because if people just see me, I would think they'd say, well, hell, I don't need to read that book. I can just go talk to Manuel.
Oh man, there's a scene in the book that really brings that to mind, and it's when Gus goes to the ex-girlfriend's parents' house, and they're very defensive and they're not real friendly, and you know, and he really picks up that this is not just because they don't like me, they don't like me. They don't like me, you know. And so, you know, when you put that in the book, it was like, oh man, I remember going through that in my own life, you know. And so the realities that we face in life were so well projected into the book, because I could truly feel the emotion when, you know, his stomach knotting up, and when he walked out of that house, like, oh man, poor Gus.
Yeah, it's well, you know this, Paul. I mean, people of color in the United States, sooner or later, we are confronted with some act of racism. I mean, it's just the way things are. I mean, I grew up in the 50s, right? So, I mean, things were a lot different back then in terms of obvious stuff. Now maybe it's a little more subtle, but a person of color in this country is sooner or later going to confront or be confronted with some kind of racism, whether it's, you know, you want to date a white girl when you're a teenager and you're unsuspecting, you go to their house and you're treated like dirt, or it's an interaction at a bar, or, you know, at some social event, or
a
you
job
know,
interview.
on the job, or a job interview.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people who aren't aware that that's going on, you know, it's getting better in terms of awareness. I believe that.
Mm-hmm.
And this past year of Black Lives Matter and all that protest has really served to bring it out more,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can talk about it, people can deal with it, and understand that, yeah, we've all got room for improvement, and we got to do some things to make the world better, right? I mean, it takes positive action. Just wishing for it doesn't change it.
Certainly.
You've got to do something. So, you know, in my books, that stuff's going to happen, just because I know that stuff happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought the reality of it but that was subtle. I mean, it wasn't, you didn't put it in a way that it made it feel like Gus had a chip on his shoulder, or that, you know, he was, had any, you know, I mean, he didn't take it personal. He went to his next investigative point, but I really like that you interjected that, because it's the reality of life for many people, and so for me, I think that brought it home and made it a lot more real and a lot more believable, you know, because it's the reality of life sometimes, and it's really unfortunate. But I do agree. I think we're in the rage of the anti-racist. I think that anti-racist thinking is becoming more and more prevalent in our society, and you know, who knows? Maybe there'll be a day when we can have a little bit more harmony and a little bit more. There's certainly a lot more awakening and a lot more awareness taking place. I got to say that.
Yeah. We can only hope, right, Paul?
We can only hope, yeah. And, you know, we can be the change agent. You know, we can stop looking for the change. You know, I always say, if you can't find a good person, be one. You know, when I was a young man, I went and did motivational speaking in the Denver Public Schools, and people would ask me, "Why do you do that?" And I said, "Because I can't find a hero, so I got to be one." There's not one out there. No one's taken these played, you know. And so I would go to Lincoln High School, and, you know, I went to Martin Luther King and Kennedy and North High School, and I went and talked to the at-risk kids, because that's who I was, you know.
That's cool.
And so, you know, when I had made an announcement on Facebook, and someone says, "Oh, I went to a class he taught. He was really awesome," and they was like, "Very cool," you know. So one of your students was really, really very appreciative of what you've done for him, you know, in his life.
Yeah.
And I don't remember his name offhand, but you know, it's really, I think it's not just an inspiration to see, you know, Latino people doing things with their life and making contributions, but doing literary contributions that really do elevate us to a point of, you know what, we're capable, we're deserving, and we're not looking for a handout. We're just looking for an equal playing field. That's it, you know.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get off on race, but I mentioned it earlier, but the way you describe things, and I had just folded a page to the side because it just really stuck out to me, and I'm just going to kind of just read this from this one point. I think this is where I was looking at. Hot and dry Pueblo in the summer meant sticky asphalt, still air that buzzed overhead, insects, and mellow, brilliant nights. I mean, I could just feel it, you know. Just so cool.
Did you ever hang out in Pueblo?
Oh yeah. I've been to Pueblo many times. I got family down there, so I was born in Walsenburg.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, you know, being able to write like that, if you're writing a blog, or if you're writing a book or a biography, a novel, whatever you're writing, you know, go back to your words and look at them, and, like you say, edit them again. And exactly what you said, it's about editing and re-editing till you come up with a piece of work that you're pleased with, and that you say, this is what I'm trying to convey.
Yeah, that's it for me, you know, is doing the best you can with the words that we're given.
Yes. I think I love words. I love being a wordsmith. I got to tell you, I'll hear a word, or I'll think of a word, and I'll text it to my daughter, you know, because it's like, you got to get this word. This is such a utopian, or whatever the word is. And so, as I continue to read, and I I continue to read your works, I really look forward to getting more and more insight and into you and to just your creative spirit. And I think it's just a thing that it's an idea whose time has come, and I think it's a genre that really is it's not just powerful and moving, but it's inspirational. And it was great. It's really I don't read a lot of fiction too, so that really was exciting to read a fiction book that Todd Fanistock was one of my guests recently, and he's on his 22nd book, and his book was just like this, very, very gripping and very easy to read and hard to put down.
That's the best kind, man.
That's right.
Yeah.
So now, where are you working on a next novel now, or are you?
Well, I haven't started a novel. I'm kicking around some ideas, but once a book is finished and it comes out, it does take me a while to get geared up to try something new.
Mm-hmm.
I've got some short stories that'll be coming out in the next, then over the next year. Some short stories that I've written and have already been accepted. They'll be coming out, so that'll probably be my next stuff in print.
Nice.
I would like to mention, if I could, there's a group that was recently organized. The acronym is CALMA, C-A-L-M-A, and it stands for Colorado Alliance of Latino Mentors and Authors. And what it is basically is an organization of Latino writers. And so we have, the group has people from all over the state. They have monthly meetings. They're going to have a mixer later this month where we all meet each other face to face. But like I said, it's a fairly new organization. I didn't create it. I didn't organize it. I'm a member of it. But I'm very pleased that the people who did organize it put it together, because it's a place where we can all kind of come together and talk about stuff like you and I have been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because writing is a very lonely business, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're all by yourself trying to create something. So it's very good to get together with other people like that. And I think Calma is a good group. So for other writers out there, Latino writers or Latina writers, you may want to check them out. They've got a website, and you can find out all about them.
You bet. Karen Trujillo, a guest that was recently on my show, is very involved in Calma.
Yeah, right.
Yes, and she actually was the one who turned me on to Calma. So
good. That's good.
So I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I'm going to keep that up and keep talking about that, because resources are always nice to find, and they're not always easy to find.
Yeah.
So it's a good, especially when you have like-minded people. Let me see, where are we on time? We got a couple minutes. I know that once your book is written, you got to sit back and take a breath and really just revel in it, and just really appreciate what you've accomplished. And so having sat here with you and talking about this book, I really feel like, man, I've stumbled onto something really good, something very, I think that, like you say, reading is so important. It's more important than the writing, and so it really did inspire me, and it really gave me a lot of insight and just the creative way that you put things together. And I can't wait to find out. Oh, Gus is in for some. I think he's in for some surprises in these last few pages. It's got to be, because it's been building up, and it's a real crescendo of just. I don't want to call it tension, but just excitement, and just anticipation for the next page.
Yeah, wow.
Very, very good. Very. Who are some of your authors who are inspirations to you? Who has really given you a lot of inspiration in your life?
Rudolfo Anaya.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with his work?
Yes. I actually have one of his books, and I can't think of the name of it.
Maybe Bless Me Ultima.
Oh, Bless Me Ultima.
Yeah. See, Bless Me Ultima is an American masterpiece. It's a classic. I mean, Mr. Anaya was given the National Award of Merit. Unfortunately, he passed away last year, but he was one of the first Latino writers to get recognized by all kinds of people, and he's one of the best. So and he was always ready to help other writers.
Mm-hmm.
He helped me when I got started. He used to have a little house up in the mountains in New Mexico in Jemez that he would just give out to writers if you were going to go and just write and you needed some solitude and some space. You could go there and it was beautiful and quiet, and he would just turn it over to you for a week, maybe 2 weeks. All you had to do was find your own food, you know. So Anaya was one. I also appreciate the work of a guy from California named Alfredo Vea. He's a wonderful writer. He's published 4 books since the 1990s, so he's not, you know, he doesn't churn them out a lot quicker, but they're excellent, they're beautiful works. And then I'd like to mention Lucia Corpi, who's another writer from the West Coast, and she's written poetry and crime fiction and memoirs, and I admire Lucia because she's still at it, you know, she's been doing it for decades.
Man, cool. Well, I'm gonna have to get these before I leave and get these names, because I know Rudolfo Anaya. I actually have Bless Me Ultima. Oddly enough, I've never read the book, so that's going to be my next read.
I think you'll like it, man.
I think so. And I got this book, and I don't know how I ended up putting it on a shelf and just, you know, went to the next book. And sometimes you do that. I'd go to the tattered cover and spend $100 and say, man, what am I going to do with all these books?
Right, I know the feeling, man.
I'm so honored to have you as my guest today.
It's been my pleasure, Paul.
Folks, we've been talking to Manuel Ramos. He wrote this most recent book, Angels in the Wind, a Mile High Noir. Please pick this book up. Get it, tattered cover, order it online, call the station, we'll get a copy to you. But please, get your hands on this book ASAP. Folks, you've been watching The Weekend Boost on KUHS The Stream. I'm your host, Paul Lane. Again, Manuel Ramos, thank you again for being on our show. And I hope you have a wonderful week. We will see you in a couple of weeks. Take care, folks.